Hi everyone, hope you're having a great day. I've spent mine digging into the latest release from the mercurial mind of Annie Clark. Today was the release of the 7th album from St. Vincent, named All Born Screaming. It's abrasive and certainly interesting, but is it any good, or is it too arty to be appreciated? It's been 3 years since the last St. Vincent album, Daddy's Home, and I can't be the only one thinking it was her weakest release yet. It may have somehow won a Grammy, but it was hardly some mainstream success. How else could we explain that Annie would moonlight as a guest with the band on Late Night with Stephen Colbert, the kind of spot usually reserved for over-the-hill relics like Joe Walsh and James Taylor? Considering Daddy's Home was hyped with having 70s funk overtones, I thought it would be right up my alley. Unfortunately, the album left me arctically cold. Outside of the soulful jamming outro that ends at the holiday party, and the solid snake-like groove on the second single, Down, it never really picks up the tempo enough to honestly call it funky. It's not really surprising most of the tracks don't stick. On the first song, she cheekily admits the label said, "We don't have a record," and this seems like an attempt to cook one up on the fly. One of the later tracks on the album even co-ops a popular 80s tune, 9 to 5, from Sheena Easton, kinda shamelessly so. Baby, takes the morning train. Good luck getting that out of your head. I get it though. Annie had spread herself super thin. Between writing, soundtracking, and starring in her pet project film, The Nowhere Inn, it couldn't have been easy to deliver an album that came close to her peak. But man, a handful of good songs would have been nice. Unfortunately, despite all her efforts, both the film and Daddy's Home ended up muddled and unmemorable. I would only suggest either for the absolute diehards. So despite treasuring her early albums, I wasn't exactly pining for the latest St. Vincent. However, once I heard the chunky blast of power chords of Broken Man, I was reeled right back in. And when the second song was released, the creeping naughty rocker Flea, with heavy drumming courtesy of legend Dave Grohl, all of a sudden my hopes had soared sky high. Has Annie gotten her mojo back? That's enough yada yada yada. Let's talk the new album. Pairing her haunting, duetting vocals over Yeezus synth hits is quite an apocalyptic start to the record, so the title seems apt. When the steady bass groove enters, it adds more textured synthetics that recall Radiohead's Kid A. Side note, I remember how people thought Kid A was the future of how music was going to sound. That never really happened. The song takes an interesting turn with a Jimmy Page classic rock guitar line that jams for a little before Annie's voice floats on the bridge over sputtering electronics. To me, this tune feels more like a prelude to the album than a song that stands on its own. I wouldn't be surprised if she starts shows with this though. All in love, reckless. Annie's voice sounds desperate over stark piano that rings like chimes on a creepy grandfather clock. The minimalism accents the emotional tension. The background vocals kind of recall later era Nick Cave, all whispered and ethereal. 2/3 through, the dam that we've been waiting for to relieve the pressure finally breaks, with an army of synthesizers fluttering and pounding. That cathartic release ends up being a little underwhelming though. Overall, it's kind of a lightweight tune and not super memorable. I mentioned before that this song got me hooked. It's so addictive. Annie has covered 9 Inch Nails' song Piggy, so you know she enjoyed Trent Reznor's industrial rhythms. Broken Man starts with a grimy electronic grind that's not too far from the tight electro groove of Mass Education's High Point, Los Angeles, before the dynamic builds and builds into another beast entirely. 3 different drummers are featured on the track. Her engineer, Kian Riordan, assists with Clark's programming to start off the creeping digital pulse. As the arrangement picks up steam, the middle section features jazz drummer Mark Juliana, perhaps best known for drumming on David Bowie's brilliant final album, Black Star, and his frenzied rattles add anxious rhythms. By the end, the demolisher of drums, Dave Grohl, is bashing the toms right into the red, as bursts of raw, distorted power chords and blaring saxophone skronks start to drown out Clark's voice, as her mental state becomes more and more unhinged. As composed as she typically sings, it's thrilling to hear her let loose in a way she could flirt with live, particularly on earlier cuts like Your Lips Are Red, but rarely displays rawly on record. St. Vincent will probably never make a relatively straightforward rock album, even though her label probably hopes she would. But I know she has a gem in her if she ever wanted to. A claustrophobic, complete banger of a track. One of her best in years. The other track that features your favorite rock and roll uncle, Dave Grohl. If you don't enjoy Dave as a person, you have no soul whatsoever. He's the best. While the verses skulk along with a twisting palm-muted riff, when he kicks into the massive chorus, you hear the monster drum work that made Queens of the Stone Age's Songs for the Deaf one of the best hard rock albums ever. The fills are so heavy. Annie's awesome snarling guitar recalls Grohl's other band. No, not that one. I'm talking Nirvana. The wild guitar wails like some of Kurt Cobain's best feral lines. Her guitar work is peerless, showing why she is one of the best of a whole generation. The chorus is stadium huge, and her catchiest earworm on the album. I've had it stuck in my head for days, it's so memorable. Also, I have to shout out the bridge breakdown, which adds a third section to the song with a completely different, jangly, almost psychedelic feel, before rearing back into the gigantic chorus one last time. Skin-crawlingly sinister, it's vicious grunge that explodes like a matchstick to kerosene. When you first hear this, I think one name has to come to mind: Prince. This jam screams big Prince energy. From the looped, pulsating deep synth groove, the funky chicken scratch guitars, and digital horn cues, the song sounds like it could be backed by the new power generation. It's not a lazy imitation though. There's enough dark anxiety to make it undeniably a St. Vincent track. And it's so fun. The pseudo-rap verses are playful and catchy, and the ever-shifting arrangement is a treat for your ears. I'm sure his royal badness would have approved. It's the shortest track on the album, but it's still a highlight that bumps.
Almost lost you in these violent times.
The exaggerated horns give me flashbacks to St. Vincent's collaboration album with the Talking Heads' David Byrne, Love This Giant, which is a very good thing. It remains an underrated classic. The merging of the blaring horns with the shuffling trip-hop beat is hypnotic. Adding in Clark's direct, yearning vocals and cascading tremolo guitars give it an almost film noir vibe. Black and white cues after hours with something shady going down. It has really great production, which seems like a good time to mention that this is the first St. Vincent release she self-produced herself, and doesn't feel quite as neutered as some of her productions with Taylor Swift's BFF, Jack Antonoff. I really dig the groove, and it has some of Clark's best vocals on the album. One of my favorites for sure. A simple drum machine beat paces the tempo for a slow digital waltz, with echoey Robert Fripp guitars circa David Bowie's Heroes era, while slowly adding in a thumping fuzzy bass on the low end. It aims for this kinda lighters up sing-along anthem, but the chorus isn't really strong enough for that reality. Maybe I'm wrong, let me know. I generally like the downtrodden feel though. The emotional heft feels honest, and her guitar work is pretty great as usual. It's like her guitar speaks in another language, bending, wailing, crying. Artistic statement type albums feel incomplete without a sad, swaying number, as to have some spiritual low point, and it very much comes off as the end of Act 2, before we enter the final stretch. Starting Act 3, the tempo changes immediately into something simultaneously playful and dark, with a strange manipulated instrument loop like some sort of alien kalimba, along with buzzing, ominous synthesizers. The chorus melody is quite strong, and pauses the panging self-doubts of the creeping sonics. The song is dedicated to hyper-pop music producer Sophie, who died tragically in 2021. While they never actually met, there's definitely some beautiful honesty in trying to honor what their music meant to Clark. It's a solid track, with her love shining through the clattering guitars and scattering, pulsing electronics. If this is what post-plague pop sounds like, I'm here for it. Well, this is the weirdest song on the record. Swelling organ leads to a bass strutting a reggae-like rhythm. It's the lightest tune on a pitch-dark album, and probably the closest the record gets to Daddy's Home Part 2, with a healthy dose of staple singers' gospel vocals. It's not exactly a party starter, but I think it's as happy as a St. Vincent song can get. Off-kilter weirdo pop that's probably a little too pretentious to really connect with a large audience. The tune does feature some reliably stellar guitar work, with a particularly strong melodic solo, but as a song, it's probably the weakest of the set. Following So Many Planets, the song starts similarly upbeat, nearly power pop, with its clean, trebly guitar riffs and bubbling bass lines, courtesy of Kate Laban, who, fun fact, recently produced the last Wilco album, which is quite enjoyable if you never checked it out. Anyway, part 1 of this song might share the same kooky positive spirit of the previous tune, but the melody is more immediate, with Clark's voice clear and warm, and the interplay between her shiny sliding guitar lines and Laban's nimble percolating bass is exquisite. When the bass cuts out halfway through, it incorporates more ambient textures over a steady, syncopated snap, before that cuts out entirely and morphs into the second part with thumping, low-frequency throb. At this point, the church choir enters to sermonize the title like angels or demons, while the drum and bass gets more and more agitated. I could see this really working well at a live show. Strobing lights sync to the building dynamics. It's an epic ending, closing on a fairly strong note, and one definitely designed to make you want to put on the album again. Alright, snap judgment time. After playing through the album several times, there's no doubt in my mind that it's miles better than Daddy's Home. Definitely a course correction. Right now, I'm grading it as a solid B. It's not quite as good as Mass Education, but who knows, maybe with more rotations, it might dig deeper into my psyche. Her self-titled album was a grower that eventually became one of my favorites. St. Vincent albums tend to reveal themselves a bit more through time. For the highlights, somewhat obviously, Broken Man is a standout, a tightly coiled emotional freakout, hands down one of the best tracks released all year, and Flea is also a completely killer metallic rocker. If you don't enjoy either of those tunes, I'm not so sure the album is for you. St. Vincent tends to be an acquired taste. However, if those gems spark your curiosity, the tracks Violent Times and Big Time Nothing are also choice cuts that need to be heard. What about you though? What's your gut reaction? What songs stick out most to you? I'd love to hear your thoughts, so drop a comment down below and we'll continue this conversation. I'm very glad Annie Clark is back, creating ambitious, audacious music. After all, art rock shouldn't be a dirty word. Looking forward to hearing from you, and thank you for watching. Never ends.